Okay, so this is Wendy, and I know you don't want to hear from me, but you want to hear from Elizabeth. So I forgot to get another bio from her, but if you registered, then you saw the bio, so I won't say anything more. But I've known Elizabeth since 2017. I met her at the Women in Statistics and Data Science Conference down in North Carolina. So funny story, I asked her to run for office at the government statistics section at the ASA. I saw her in Baltimore, and I looked at her at the meeting, and I just really was at our business meeting, and my brain was just, I guess, not in the right place. And I said, I kind of recognized her. I said, do I know you? And then one of the other officers said, well, I hope so. You nominated her to run for the office in the section. So now I make it a point to always remember Elizabeth. So anyway, I'm very happy to have her here today because, well, she's fantastic. She's been chair of the government statistics section, so I've gotten to know her quite well through that venue, and she's fantastic. And I've just recently heard about this imposter syndrome, so I'm really looking forward to hearing more about it. And just another quick story, the WSS conference was last week, and I was on a panel, and somebody asked about this, about the imposter syndrome. So I'm very excited to hear what Elizabeth is going to tell us today. So Elizabeth, it's all up to you, and I'll let you stand right here. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to be at BLS for the first time, and I'm excited to talk to people today about the imposter syndrome. And I want to start out by saying that I am not the expert in imposter syndrome. I heard about this topic I saw a couple of years ago, and it really resonated. And so in the interim, I have mentioned it several times, had sort of hallway conversations with people about the imposter syndrome, and everybody says, oh, is that really a thing? I want to know a little bit more about that. And there's a discussion group back at the office, and so I had thrown some materials together so people would have references, and that has sort of morphed into now having given a talk a couple of times about imposter syndrome. So those are my credentials in it, which is minimal. Other than, I definitely think that I have experienced it in my life and was interested enough and thought that it was important enough to the community to try to provide some references and some of the sort of framework behind imposter syndrome. So with that, I think everybody probably knows what the definition of imposter is. So you pretend to be somebody else, generally to deceive others for fraudulent gain, etc. Lots of synonyms that we can associate with imposter. And that brings us to, well, what is imposter syndrome? So imposter syndrome basically describes people that are not able to really recognize their own accomplishments and their own successes, and tend to internalize things as, I have gotten to where I am today by some other means, maybe by luck, happening to be in the right place at the right time. And generally they have what can often be a paralyzing fear of being quote unquote discovered. They're going to find out that I am the fraud, I am the imposter in the room. Everybody else in the room must know what the speaker up there is talking about in this very theoretical statistics talk, right? Or in the class or in the meeting that you're in. And this often occurs despite there being a lot of external evidence of accomplishments. So you may have awards on your wall, you may be getting promotions, receive a degree, and yet still feel like you are the imposter, and eventually you're going to be found out. And people sometimes live in this fear, and it can affect your success going forward. So we'll talk about some of those things today. And the actual term imposter syndrome was coined in 1978 by Clance and Imes. And early research did focus on imposter syndrome in women. However, it's since then generally been recognized to be pretty prevalent across both men and women at about the same rates. It's often called imposter phenomenon, fraud syndrome, or the imposter experience. And you can find, throughout the slides, I will try to provide the references from which I pulled particular definitions, et cetera. So you can see at the bottom there that some of it came from Wiki. There's also several books, et cetera, that will be referenced throughout. So again, none of this is my own work. It's just an area that's very much of interest to me, and I think is good to introduce to the community so that people understand that they might not be alone in this. So I think that this XKCD comic says a lot. So in introducing the world leading expert psychologist in imposter syndrome, she says, no, I'm not really the expert. There's lots of people that know more about this than I do. So, and you'll see that echoed actually throughout some of the experts that we'll spend a little bit of time thinking about. So imposter syndrome has been recognized by the American Psychological Association. Again, I think the importance of discussing this is so that people understand that if you possibly feel that you might have experienced imposter syndrome at some point in time, that you are not alone. And I think this particular article in the APA journal is looking at graduate students and how they feel in the course of their graduate studies, but you'll find that it is prevalent across different areas of people's career as well. So a couple of other articles to point you to, and I'll touch just a little bit on each of these articles. There's an article in Science magazine, so when you have the slides, there's the reference there, and then an article in Forbes magazine, and we'll also talk about a couple of TED Talks that references are provided for. So there's several sources of information on this should you want to pursue that. So in Science magazine, it's focusing specifically on scientists, and it's, again, the feeling that accomplishments are just luck or deceit, and that they're in over their heads, right? So you feel this feeling that, again, eventually they're going to find out you don't know what you're talking about, and it's going to catch up to you in some way, right? You're going to get to a problem you can't solve. You're going to be found out as the imposter, etc. And the article points out that the key to getting past it is recognizing it and then making accurate, realistic assessments of your performance. So how do you take your external accomplishments and really internalize that so that you can perhaps get past what you might be feeling with regards to imposter syndrome. And for me personally, I think equally important is knowing that you are not alone. And there's likely a few other people in the room experiencing those same types of feelings. The Forbes article puts out a long list of public figures that you can peruse through of people who have worried about being uncovered as an imposter. I think Kate Winslet, the actress, is on that list. A few other high-profile, high achievers. Academy Award-winning actress feels that she's going to be found out that she's not really good at what she does when she's clearly achieved the highest award that community is able to give. And the article points out is not whether we occasionally or regularly fear failing or looking foolish, but do we allow that fear to take power over our own situation, right? So are we allowing that fear to keep us from taking actions that might further our career, allow us to experience success, and then appreciate the success that we have perhaps earned, and get us to our goals and aspirations. So those are some of the references that you can turn to if you'd like to look into the topic a little bit more. So now I'll talk you through two TED Talks that I watched that I thought both were very interesting. So Lou Solomon is an expert in imposter syndrome, and she identifies some of the syndromes that you might feel if you're experiencing imposter syndrome. So I already touched on some of these, but she specifically talks about, I've been lucky so far. I hope that this keeps up. I hope my luck doesn't run out, right? It's going to eventually, and I'll be found out. And that experiencing imposter syndrome, you may feel that the achievements don't have anything to do with yourself. You were just in the right place at the right time. Your team did all of the work. You just were kind of there along for the ride, that type of thing. And then she said she had this revelation, wait, this is a weird condition. Isn't there some weird condition out there that has a name? It's like an Alfred Hitchcock movie or something, right? So her talk is pretty entertaining if you'd like to look that up. And then Valerie Young is an internationally known expert on imposter syndrome, wrote an award-winning book on imposter syndrome. She has a PhD in astrophysics from Caltech, and yet she says she has regularly experienced the imposter syndrome. So her book is The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women, Why Capable People Suffer from Imposter Syndrome and How to Thrive in Spite of It. Did I step on something back here? That's and yet, so she started a support group for people experiencing imposter syndrome. And in the support group, she says, but I knew that I was the imposter in the group because I really am the imposter. And all of these other people are really good at what they do, but I am an imposter, and so I shouldn't be in the imposter syndrome support group. So it even these sort of high achieving experts in the field have struggled with this and have felt it and even experienced it in their own support groups for imposter syndrome. Okay, so how can we recognize imposter syndrome? So the Imes and Clance's theory suggests several behaviors of high achieving professionals with imposter syndrome. And so we'll walk through some of these today, and I'll try to point you to some, again, some further references. And it also would be great to have a discussion. So I wanted to reiterate, I think Donna mentioned at the beginning, if people online have comments that they want to put in the chat, I actually can't see it, but I believe Donna can. And then of course in the room, it'd be great to engage in the discussion. And then as we go through the list, I will tell you that as I read through these materials, again, prepping for the discussion a couple of years ago, every single one, oh, that's me. Oh, that's me too. How did they know? So perhaps you'll have this same experience. Okay, so some of the syndromes that we'll talk through. And I want to also point out that some of these maybe characteristics aren't necessarily bad, right? So if we have diligence and you're charming, that's not necessarily, those aren't bad traits, right? But the idea is if you're hiding behind them, or they're used as a keeping you from doing something else, or you're over diligent and you're overdoing things, that type of thing. So diligence. So people experiencing imposter syndrome feel that they have to work very hard, right, to prevent people from finding out that they're actually an imposter. And again, it is not a bad trait to work hard, right? So, but what tends to happen is this hard work leads to more praise and more success, and it just perpetuates the feeling of imposter syndrome. So once again, hard work can be a good thing. However, the imposter may feel that they need to work 2 or 3 times as hard, right? You over prepare, you tinker, you're always the last one at your desk. You can't turn something in. It has to be perfect. You're obsessing over these details, etc. And so that's when it starts to get into an unhealthy space where you're perhaps experiencing mental and physical exhaustion over trying to make something perfect in fear of being found out and in the diligence that you may experience in imposter syndrome. And then there's the feeling of being phony. So you feel that you want to give the right answer. Again, that's not a bad thing to give the right answer, to want to give the right answer. However, you perhaps feel like you're attempting to give your supervisor or your professor or your boss the answer that you believe that they want. Maybe you feel that you know a different answer, a better answer. You can lead the conversation in a different direction. However, this leads to an increase in feeling like you are being fake. So it's just, again, perpetuating the idea that you feel that you're being an imposter, because you don't want to disagree. You don't want to show that you might be, that you don't know, perhaps don't know what you're talking about. They might interpret not getting the answer that they want as you not knowing what you're doing. And again, just perpetuates the feeling of the imposter syndrome. And then we have the use of charm. So again, it can be good to charm someone sometimes, right? However, here the idea is that someone experiencing imposter syndrome would feel that that is the only way that they're able to gain approval or praise. Right? I'm not getting this because I solved this amazing this great report and I've done the work. It's because I've charmed them into thinking that I know what's going on and I know the answer. And this. Oh, I'm sorry. So, thank you, Donna. Okay.
No, I think it's because sometimes it can move a little way and also look at.
Okay.
We'll do better next time.
No problem. No problem.
This
so I will.
Is the worst part of webinars is the audio.
So,
drives me crazy.
So no problem. So I will stand here like a robot for the for the sound purposes. Absolutely. So this use of charm again helps causes people to then seek out these relationships. Again, you see the idea that it then perpetuates itself, and you may feel that the only reason you have a good relationship with your boss or your supervisor or your professor is because you're using the charm. And then when you do get the praise or the recognition from your supervisor, then you feel that it's based on the charm, and it's not based on the work that you did or the report that you turned in or the input that you were able to provide to the team. And then we come to avoiding displays of confidence. And I'll step away for one moment and say that I think there is a difference between confidence and arrogance, right? So people don't tend to want to appear arrogant, but as a professional, we hope that we appear confident, right? And we hope that we are confident. However, an imposter may feel that if they actually believe in their intelligence, then they may be rejected by others because others might say, oh no, they don't actually know what they're talking about. So again, it's sort of self-perpetuating. And so then they avoid showing that confidence. They avoid that possible rejection that they might feel if they were to exhibit that confidence in their abilities. So those are the sort of syndromes that you can perhaps see, and there's some other slightly different ways to define things that we'll touch on as well. And then, so what we have here is we have defined out the 5 types of imposters that you may fit into. And this is again where I say, wow, these all apply to me. And let me state, when we get to that slide, you'll understand I do not consider myself a natural genius. So, and when we get there, you'll understand. So the perfectionist, they set excessively high goals, and when they fail to reach that goal, then they experience the self-doubt and the worry about measuring up, right? But if we are constantly setting excessively high goals, we are not always going to be able to reach excessively high goals. That's hence the word excessively, right? Again, leads to experiencing major self-doubt and worry about measuring up. And then we have the superwoman or superman. Since people who experience imposter syndrome are convinced that they are the phonies among all the other people that really do know what they're doing, then the superwoman, superman will push themselves even harder to do the work, harder and harder in order to measure up to what they feel everyone else is actually exhibiting. And then we get to the natural genius. They judge their success based on what they consider to be innate abilities as opposed to efforts. So I was not born knowing what 2 + 2 was, right? I had to learn that. However, an imposter feels that if they have to work hard at something, then they assume they must be bad at it. And this must come so easily for everybody else, right? I'm the only one that has to work really hard at understanding what 2 + 2 is. So if then they are not able to do something quickly or fluently, they come across a new challenge and it doesn't come innately to them, then there's an alarm that sounds and they think, oh, here I am again. I am not actually good at this. I am the imposter in the room. And so I would say step back and say, consider our efforts and results as opposed to judging based on abilities. And then we have the rugged individualist. And they're determined to do it all on their own. And this pretty much describes my entire graduate coding career. They believed that asking for help will reveal, right, that they are the imposter, that they're really the phony in the room. And then further, they refuse assistance because they have to prove, whether it's to themselves or to the other people in the room, that they can do it themselves, right? And everybody needs some help now and again, right? But some experience in imposter syndrome may fall into this rugged individualist category. And then there's the expert. And they feel that they have somehow tricked their employer into hiring them, right? And they are not really the expert in that particular topic. There's a better expert somewhere else. Somehow they lucked out, got the job, and they will eventually be exposed as inexperienced or unknowledgeable in whatever it is that they were hired to do, right? Or brought on in graduate school. I'm convinced that's going to happen to me any day now. So, so before we move on, I'm just curious. I know when I went through this list, I thought, yes, that's me. Oh no, that one's me. Oh no, that one's me. Did anyone else think at least a few of those might have applied to them at some point in their career? So I think pretty much everyone except the one asleep in the back raised their hand. So fantastic. He's still asleep. Okay. So now, what are some of the issues that can be associated with imposter syndrome? So these are probably going to seem fairly intuitive, just considering the conversation that we've had thus far. So burnout, and I kind of grouped them together, and burnout and sleep deprivation. So you're getting to the point of basically exhausting yourself. So the effects that we see with burnout and sleep deprivation obviously affects our work productivity, our work product that we're actually putting out, so the quality of the work that we're doing. And then this will affect our success in the long run, right? We can't burn the candle at both ends because eventually we get to the middle of the candle, right? And we burn out. So, so these are some of the issues that we can encounter if we're constantly pushing ourselves to be better and better in order to match up to the perceived level of others in the room or in the career. And then we have the fear, right? So we've talked about the fear of always being found out. And so what can this lead to? Aside from it's just not that much fun, except maybe at Halloween, to walk around in fear all the time. So this affects our willingness to take new chances, to take on new roles in our career, right? So I've gotten this far and no one has found me out. But if I try to do the next thing, they will definitely find me out, right? I will definitely be exposed as the imposter. So I don't want to take on that new opportunity. So that leads to missed opportunities in our career, right? Classes I didn't take in graduate school because I was convinced that I would never get through them. You know, the job that you didn't apply for. And this in particular, and I think there is a gender divide here. Their studies have shown that women look at a job application or a job posting, and in order to feel that they're qualified to apply for that job, they feel that they need to meet 10 out of the 10 qualifications, maybe 9 out of 10 of those qualifications. And really, the employer is hoping that you meet 4, right? So it's the ideal candidate that's on that list, right? And they're hoping that they can get someone with 4 or 5. So you probably are a good match. And you don't have to be an expert in all of those things, right? The key would be being an expert in one, but all the missed opportunities. So then this all leads to feeling undeserving and being unable to accept or appreciate praise that's given. And this basically affects your happiness and your fulfillment in your career and possibly in other aspects of your life as well. So again, starting to recognize that this might be something that's at play can sort of help us just get past that and figure out how to deal with these in our career and ultimately help us navigate the success in our career. Okay, I'm just going to close that. On Donna, I think there might be a request. I'll close it so that I can continue. Okay. Uh-oh. Oh, okay. So just a slightly different way to break those things down, and we won't walk through these individually, but Lou Solomon talks about those ideas in her talk as well, and she calls them the Fantastic Four, and very similar themes: anxiety, perfectionism, self-doubt, and fear of failure. So just a little bit different way to frame it there. Okay, so we've kind of gotten through some of the technical definitions or how we might recognize something. And so I can just talk for a moment about some of my personal experience. So can we talk about grad school for just a minute? So I'm still amazed that I passed. And I am convinced that UNC is going to call me up at any moment and tell me that they're taking my PhD back, right? This was all an accident. So, yeah, and Wendy says she felt the same way. So luckily I've changed my name since then, so that they can't find me. I know. So, and I had mentioned this to a professional friend who has a math PhD, and she says, "Darn it, Liz, now I have dreams that they're going to come and take away my PhD too." So grad school is very difficult, as in some sense grad school should be. Statistics is hard, right? I remember talking with a group of graduate students a few years ago, and we were talking about what it's like to try to get through your preliminary examinations or orals, et cetera, whatever your school might call them. They said, I just don't understand. Everybody's getting through, and I don't know why I didn't do better. And I said, well, can we just talk about the fact that statistics is hard? So let's start there. And that was something I didn't grasp in grad school. And I'm sure there were people I went to grad school with that sailed right through it. I saw them, and I absolutely was the imposter in the room. And then I get to my postdoc, and I think this is where, for sure, it's going to happen. They're going to realize that I somehow magically tricked my advisor into signing off on the dotted line on my PhD. And I'm not going to get through this postdoc. That's okay. I'm going to get as much experience out of it as I can, just learn as much as I can, and then when they kick me out, I'll go find a regular job, or whatever it is. And I just constantly felt like I was surrounded by people that had gotten through grad school on their own merits, right, instead of an accident like I did. And then they were going to go on to these successful careers. And what was I going to do once they found me out, right? And it was going to be any minute now. And I better just appreciate this while I could. So then I got my first job. And then I took another postdoc. So there's a lot of interplay happening here. But I was assistant director of a research program for a while, which I actually did not stay in that job because the program then did not have funding. But then had I stayed there, I thought, how am I going to learn how to run this program? They are eventually going to find out. That's okay. I'll be here for a year or so, and it'll be a good line on my CV. And then I got my second job, and I'm still worried they're going to take that away. So it continues. But that said, I have definitely, over these situations, experienced it a bit less, been able to take a step back and be able to recognize that I am bringing something to each of these positions. And it takes a little bit of effort on my part to recognize what I might bring. Maybe I have a different perspective. Maybe I have a set of skills that the most brilliant statistician over in the corner with their head down writing 100 theoretical statistics paper in a year, maybe I can bring something else that they aren't bringing to the statistics community. So that brings us to facing imposter feelings. So this is a list that came from one of the articles, and I kind of filled it out with some of the sort of tips that I've learned from myself and from talking to others. So this list came from the reference at the bottom there. And I'll kind of step through each of these. So I just realized it doesn't have my little notes. Let me see what I did here. Okay, so with facing the imposter feelings, these are sort of some of the personal lessons that I've learned. So first of all, talk to someone who can help you, right? Absolutely talk to someone. There's a lot of different, you can talk to a peer, right? You can talk to a friend, you can sort of vent. And then there's sort of the professional capacity. And I'm sure many of us have someone that they consider, multiple people that they consider a mentor that can advise them in a particular situation about your career path, next step. And I just want to take a moment to just make a slight differentiation between mentor and sponsor, and this could be its own talk in and of itself. But I find mentors in many places, and they are invaluable in my life, in my career, with decisions that I have to make. Some are short term, some are long term, some are situational. They happen to me in the room in the moment, and I just need to ask someone a question. And I have had many throughout my career and others as well. Then there's the idea of a sponsor, who is sort of like a mentor on steroids, right? They are an advocate for your career. And they are very invested in your career success. And you might find one or two, or if you're lucky, even three of these people throughout your career in different points of your career. But these are the people that go to bat for you. And that when you are not in the room, they say, I think that Wendy would be fantastic for that position. And Wendy had this great idea. But Wendy's saying, but I'm the imposter. So, and these people will help you recognize your strengths, and both mentors and sponsors throughout your career, and are the people that you can go to when you say, I've gotten to this point where I'm just convinced they're going to find out I don't know what I'm doing, and they can help reassure you that you do. And then also maybe there are times we don't know the next step. We don't necessarily know the right path, the right answer, and they can help you figure out how to get there. So instead of saying you're right, you say quit your job, right? Then they help you get to the next step. And then this has been key for me, to recognize your expertise, right? I have certain areas of expertise. I am not an expert in all things, right? And I should not be expected to be, and neither should you. And then something that sort of was an aha moment for me several years ago was, I am knowledgeable, I am not infallible. So it is okay if I make a mistake. I put forth my best effort all of the time. I'm ethical, and I have integrity in the work that I do, and I make the best decisions with the information I have at hand. I will make a mistake, and if that happens, I acknowledge it and move on and recognize where I can be an expert. And I think about other skills that I might bring to the table, for instance, communication. And just as something for you to think about in terms of something other than solving the world's most ginormous statistics equation, right? And then we need to realize that no one is perfect, right? I'm certainly not, others aren't as well. And then change your thinking with regards to that. So this has sort of evolved throughout my career as well. So when I was towards the end of my graduate school career and in my postdoc career, I was starting to get asked to review a lot of papers. And I thought, oh my goodness, how can I possibly be the one to review this paper? I don't know enough to review this paper. I would spend hours to days reviewing a paper. Again, putting my best effort, absolutely doing the best job that I could possibly do, but I would always think this is not good enough. Somebody else would review this paper better. And I eventually got to a point where I said, you know what? If they want Brian to review this paper, they can ask Brian to do it. If they want me to review the paper, I'll do the best job that I can. And so now, Brian, if you're listening, I now refer all papers to you. You're welcome. when they ask for alternative reviewers. And as a statistician, as I mentioned, I do the best ethical, thorough work that I can do. Someone else might do it better, right? This is the way that I would solve the problem, the way that I would report out the results. And I also have to consider and balance what's going on, given the time frame, the constraints, all of the other projects that I have. I can't spend all day, every day, all of my efforts on one project. And now that I've been in management for a little while, I make the best decisions that I can on behalf of my staff, again, with the information that I have at the time. And then a lot of that relies on the trust that I have in my staff, and my recognizing their expertise, and that they are not imposters, right? And also recognizing that they might not be perfect, but that they are also putting out their best efforts, etc. So I think that sort of brings me to sort of the ideas behind imposter syndrome that I wanted to share with people today. And I would certainly welcome others' experiences and discussion about imposter syndrome. So thank you so much for your time today.
Elizabeth, this is Donna, and I will just say that there have been some comments on chat where everyone agrees with you that they are absolutely the real imposter in the room. So
Yes, absolutely. So those in the room, Donna said there's been comments coming through on chat and everyone says, yes, no, I am the real imposter. So several of those have come in. So.
Anna, are there any
Well, maybe while you're looking for questions in the room, Elizabeth, there's a question from the virtual audience. Do you find that imposter syndrome is more prevalent in certain fields?
Oh, that's a great question. And again, I have not done research in imposter syndrome in that I have gone out and done a study. I have Googled a lot and watched some TED Talks. But I did see a lot about scientific fields in general. And to hypothesize that on that a bit, I think, obviously there's the hard science aspect of things, the pressure that people feel to go out and get grants. It's always kind of a competition in that sense. And then I think it can be hard sciences and statistics can be a little isolating, right? So you're in your office, you're writing your code, you're writing up your paper, especially in the beginning of your career. So it can probably perpetuate that because you're there by yourself thinking, well, someone down the hall, they must be really solving this faster than I am, and they're writing 6 papers and I'm only writing this 1, or whatever it is. So I saw a lot about the sciences, and it was interesting because it was largely also attributed to high achieving people. So it is not something, it's sort of, the more you, the more you know, you realize you don't know, right? So.
Would it be like the type A personalities?
Right, possibly, yes. The type A's, definitely, I'm type AA. So my husband is type B, but it's a longer discussion.
There's enough. I'll just keep going with the chat questions, but you all tell me if there's questions from the audience, and I can stop. But there's a question on, do you have any suggestions on communicating with your supervisor about sort of feeling like an imposter, and sort of what recommendations might you make?
Yeah, that is a good question, and I think from what I've experienced, there's such a variety of sort of personalities within the supervisors, and so I think it's a very individualized question in a way. I have had supervisors that I can walk right into their office and very freely ask them a question and sit down and say, I'm not feeling confident about this. Do you see an area where I can be doing something better? Am I missing something? Did I present that well to upper management? Was there something I missed out on? And you get that feedback of maybe there was, right? There's always a little something that could have gone better or whatever. But then, oh no, you did a great job. You really drove the point home. This was really clear. And so so that you understand you're getting that. I think it does help if you are getting a little bit of critique as well, because then you realize it's an honest exchange. And then I've had supervisors where I would not feel comfortable talking to them about that. And I hope that's a barrier that can be overcome, but it's just one of those sort of facts of life that there are some not great supervisors out there, and it might be harder to have those conversations. But what I think would be really crucial in that instance is find someone else who could serve as a mentor or a sponsor in your career, that even if your direct supervisor or perhaps graduate school advisor is not the person you feel you can go and talk to, that you would then be able to get that sort of outside opinion. And I will say my graduate advisor, very nice person. We had a good working relationship. I don't know that we were chummy buddy, but I had a lot of respect for him. So this is not a commentary on him. If anyone's looking at my CV at the moment. So yes, was there any in the room? Yes.
I was always sort of secretly convinced if I didn't work extra hard, someone was going to know. But when I went into staff, they were like, isn't a problem at all.
Oh.
Can you repeat the question for?
Oh, okay. Jenny was asking if there seemed to be evidence of it being more in minorities within a discipline, whether it was a female minority or racial minority. And I would not know. I would guess yes, because I would guess you see less representation of yourself in upper ranks. And so you think, I have to be the one that beats that out. And I'm never going to be the one that gets the one seat that the woman gets at the table, or, whatever it is. So, right. I actually had someone say that to me, you only got your PhD because you're a woman. And I said, if you ever say that to me again, we will never say it again. So when you do get those occasional comments, and you have to take a step back and say, is that what really happened? Is that what? And then I think back to the 7 years that I worked. I worked a lot. Say a phrase, but I'll refrain. And I have to really internalize that. I did the work. I put in the effort. I have a dissertation. Not very good. Don't read it. But it's so you have to get to that point where someone says that to you, and you have to be able to recognize that they're wrong, and that could be a ways away. So that was hard to hear, because you do know that it is, people are thinking that, and then you think, okay, well, why? How did you earn yours? What did you do differently than I did? Why would that be something you thought you needed to say to me?
I have a question. All right, I'll get right in front here. So when I think about the imposter syndrome, it sometimes makes me think of, the Emperor's New Clothes, that story, right? Where I think the story was, he thought he had these really nice clothes on, but he didn't have any clothes on or something. Wasn't it that way? Something like that. And so I sometimes think, does that make any sense? That it's maybe a little bit different because he didn't think he was an imposter, but maybe it's just like, I wonder, they're going to say, oh, you're not really wearing it. Then that's that'll be revealed as an imposter or a fake or something. So have you seen any connection there, or reference to that story?
Possibly, in the sense that someone is eventually going to point and say, she is the imposter, and everyone is going to turn around and look and say, oh yes, she is. She really, how did she really get to where she is? And then the whole facade comes crumbling down. So there's still those moments, right? It has been easier as I've transitioned throughout my career, and I think some of that is just what comes with maturity and age in general. But then it also has been a bit of self-reflection, and the mentors in my life have been key in terms of conversations that we've had to have, and or that we've gotten to have. I just mean that what I've gleaned from those and how I've been able to turn those around into my life. And again, for me, what has been key is recognizing that there is a wide variety of skills that are needed in this discipline, right? And so you will have a set of skills that will be a good match for what it is that you were meant to do. And so I was not meant to be an academic statistician. Now I love my government job. So, but just I loved teaching, though. I missed that component of it. So I find other ways to do that. So just what other skills might you have besides, again, my big imposter reared its head with regards to writing theoretical statistics papers, which not only am I not particularly good at, but I don't enjoy it, right? So why was I forcing myself to try to do something that I did not enjoy doing, when I was always worried that I was going to be found out, that the paper was no good, and I'm waiting for those journal retractions, so, and everyone's going to point and the finger and laugh, but I hopefully have other skills that I can bring to the table that help move forward the conversation. Yes.
There's a question from the virtual audience about any advice to organizations and folks at organizations, how they can support employees who may be experiencing this, especially newer or younger employees. And the addition to that is especially when needing or wanting the support may further perpetuate the issue.
Ooh. That's a hard question.
Right. I don't think that acknowledging the issue perpetuates the issue. What I've found is in the sort of several conversations I've had about this over the last several years, is it just creates this moment where people are able to recognize that they are not alone. And then as soon as you realize that there is a resource or even just a name for something, and you can just look into it a little bit and say, I'm not the only one. How do I start to address this? Take a few steps, talk to mentors, et cetera. So I think something an organization could do is have a discussion, call an all hands and show a TED talk from these slides, bring in someone to talk about it, have small group discussions about it, start to provide people with tools about how to think about their soft skills. I think that's something that isn't focused on, can often not be focused on at organizations. It's all about let's learn how to use this new R packet. Let's write up this paper, make sure it gets into a journal. But there are soft skills that we have to use every day in our jobs, and a lot of organizations offer trainings on that, and a lot don't. So if you're offering that and allowing people to round out their skills and recognize the other skills they have that are valuable and contributing in the workplace, then I think ultimately people will be able to find what fulfills them in their career, and start to get past anything that's keeping them from taking the next step. So I think it's great to bring in the workforce.
There's a related question to that. I mean, actually kind of two comments that go together. One is, if you're the only statistician or at your place of employment, and you, how do you evaluate whether or not it's imposter syndrome, or you really aren't going to be, you're not going to be successful in that role someplace else, right? So there's that. And then the other comment that's related to that is, how do you differentiate whether you have the imposter syndrome or you truly don't belong in the field?
It is tough if you're the only statistician. I'm certainly not the only statistician at EPA, but there's a small number of us. And so you can get very isolated. And I think it's really important to have communities like ASA and GSS and such, so that you can be developing your skills and all of those things and making those connections and talking with other people. So doing that self-assessment can be a little bit difficult. Absolutely, that's I don't know that I have the magic answer, but I think being involved in communities outside your organization would absolutely be a key first step, and that will lead to other ways that you can learn about, evaluate your skills, where are you with regards to the rest of the community. And then ultimately, remember, even if you are the only statistician at your organization, you are providing value to them, because they would not be able to do certain functions if you were not there, right? So even if you're doing a t-test for them, they appreciate that, and that is a needed component, right? And then if you do get to where you're developing something that's much more complex, you probably would want to seek outside, consultation, and it just helps to talk things over, that type of thing. So again, turning back to the communities. And I feel like there was a second part of that. And how do we recognize whether we are the imposter? And right, that's true. And you can still have the conversation about imposter syndrome in smaller groups that aren't necessarily just statisticians. But for me, it came down to, am I enjoying what I'm doing? Do I feel like I'm making a contribution? And when I really thought about whether I wanted to write theoretical statistics papers for the rest of my life, again, even if I got to a place where I thought, well, I'm really good at this, I didn't enjoy it. So what skills do I enjoy, and how do I develop those? And when you're enjoying yourself, I think you feel you can sort of develop that confidence, and right, you feel fulfilled. And so that if you don't like your job, it's perhaps a slightly different conversation. But I think that was key. And some of it is, if you're starting out, some things come with time, but you can sort of speed that up by having discussions and having mentors. I think is the key thing. So I think there was a question in the room as well.
In your career, I personally felt it most when I had kids in grad school, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who faced discrimination because of that. And I still carry some of the scars, and it's like those things that people have said, like ring in my head when I want to convince myself that I am imposter. You know what I mean? And I wonder if it's common. When you get the most, how do you get those? out of your head, you know, and how do you, I don't know.
Right.
Please repeat the question.
Oh, yes. So basically the question was, is there a peak time when it's felt throughout your career, like an age? And then even if you are able to recognize it, how do you get that out of your head? And so I don't run studies on imposter syndrome, but just thinking back to what I read about it, it was sort of all stages of career, but I definitely think it seemed more prevalent in young professionals. So if you're a graduate student or a postdoc, there were a lot of those types of stories. When you come into the workforce, you don't know what to expect. You're the new person in the group, right? Everybody else has been there for 10 years. They surely know what they're doing, all of that. So I would guess that it's a little more prevalent in the younger stages of someone's career. And then with getting it out of your head, I'll let you know when mine leaves. But so again, it's for myself, it's definitely mitigated over my career, and finding something that I really enjoy has helped quite a bit. And I think for me personally, I don't know that it'll ever go away when I start a new venture, right? Like, oh, I just did one. Today is my last day in DC. So I was doing a management role temporarily while they filled the position permanently. I'm not normally located in DC. And it's been an absolutely amazing experience. And I walked in thinking, I'm gonna get fired any minute. I may as well learn the most I can in the next couple of weeks before they figure out that I have no idea what I'm doing, right? And here I am 5 months later, and in my exit interview, my boss said very nice things about how I'd handled the position. So, and that it was interesting, even hearing that, I'm thinking, when is he going to get the bad stuff? But he's going to say these nice things, but you need to do this. And there wasn't a but, and that was nice. I mean, he certainly said, there's a couple of things as you go forward. He actually said, tell more jokes. I said, well, and that kind of points to what Jenny said about minorities. I thought, well, I walked into this management position as a woman, and if I'd walked in cracking all these jokes, would I have been taken seriously at the very beginning, right? So you always see, there's always that underlay of sort of other things that are going on as well. And I have felt that I've had to work twice as hard in certain situations, right? So, yes.
Yeah. So, in your reading about this, have you seen anything between like the relationship between imposter syndrome and like the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is the little, like once you know a little bit, your confidence is really high, and then like the more you learn, like your confidence goes down.
Yes. So I personally was saying, oh, sorry, the relationship between the imposter syndrome and I think it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which basically says when you first start out in a field or you first start to learn about something, you think, oh, I know all about this. And then you learn more and realize, oh, I don't know anything about this. So it's sort of this, curve that drops off. And it's so funny because someone I didn't know that had a name until like a week ago, someone else said that. And so I would say yes. And so I think that was something I alluded to earlier with Wendy, with the more you know, the more you realize the less you know, right? So, as you sort of get into even just moving along within my organization, you finally think you get something figured out, and then you turn the corner and you go into the next office and you're in the next role, and it's this whole other world you know nothing about. So you start all over again thinking, I don't know any of this. What am I going to do? I'm definitely the only one that doesn't belong here, right? They all belong. They all have the knowledge. I don't. So, as I've gone along in my career a bit, it's slightly differentiated between, oh, I should have learned all this in graduate school, to, oh, they have all this institutional knowledge, I'll never catch up, right? So sort of all this interplay. I personally would think it was related. I don't know if there's a study that's been done.
Yeah, so I'm getting text them like, I wonder if it's connected a little bit with, we tend to judge ourselves, at least I do. I tend to judge myself based on somebody else. I mean, my impression of what they're doing and like how smart they are and how much they've accomplished. And then I think, that I'm not worthy and, I'm never going to, measure up. So we tend to kind of falsely judge ourselves, using somebody else as a yardstick. And maybe that happens because once we start delving into a subject, we realize all this stuff that's out there and that we'll never know it. Another question in that room. Okay.
My name is Miriam. I want to know if you can anymore. So, and I saw from different cultures, and I'm Asian as well, and I'm from a culture that it's very different, very, very different. And when I came here, I started learning a lot and how to. So I just wanted to know if you came across this culture.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. She was asking about whether I'd come across a cultural effect. And so I will say I have not specifically in the research that I've done, but I would absolutely imagine that there is one out there. So I think that could kind of, be its own discussion group, right? I'm sure there's a lot behind that. So if you were able to find, and I'd certainly be interested, you're welcome to email me and if you find anything. So I don't remember that specifically in the research that I did, but I would absolutely imagine that it is something that comes into play when you have the cultural difference, especially coming from, as you said, a very multicultural place to sort of less so. So that's a great question.
Are there any more online questions?
No, there were that's everything's been covered except for folks saying thank you very much for offering this, that it was so great, and truly a rare opportunity to share this conversation. So much appreciated.
Yes, thank you. Okay, well, I don't think there's any more questions in the room, so we'll thank Elizabeth for being here today. Thank you. Okay, thanks, Donna. Yes, we'll